Everybody, I think I went off half cock there. Good evening, everybody. I'm Geoff Hailstone from UPL. I'd like to welcome you all to the second of 4 webinars on the very large subject of potato storage. The thinking behind this initiative is to have a series of short 30-minute discussions rather than one long one to better cover the subject, but also to give more of you the opportunity to join the call and to ask questions. We've further sessions on the next 2 Tuesdays at 5 p.m. to cover different aspects of potato storage, and basis points are available for each session. Last week, we covered a range of subjects, including advice on dealing with wet crops, high dry matter crops and bruising, temperature pull down and holding temperatures, disease control, etc. This week, we're going to move on to discuss dealing with very mild or very cold weather, avoiding condensation, managing high CO2 levels. And we'll also cover the importance of knowing exactly what's happening in the store. So that might be MH levels, quality control assessments, and so on. And finally, we'll take a look at the most important investments and energy efficiency improvements that can be made. If you put your questions in the Q&A at the bottom, we'll pick them up as we go along. To answer those questions and offer their advice, we have 2 highly respected and experienced panelists, it says here, who I am sure will all be well known to many of you. Simon Faulkner, founder of SDF Agriculture, joins us for a second week. Simon's been a consultant and agronomist in fresh produce crops at home and abroad for over 30 years, including all aspects of potato production, agronomy and storage. Joining Simon this week is Mark Means, winner of the Farmers Weekly Farmer of the Year Award for 2024. Excuse me. Mark farms in West Norfolk on silt soils reclaimed from the sea. He focuses on potato quality, and his early adoption of new technologies has led to huge improvements, including a 28% saving in energy costs in his potato stores. So welcome, Simon and Mark. And because we've only got 30 minutes, I propose we get straight into it with the first issue, or the first question, if you like. So, which is, progress has been made in the last week in lifting, some more so in some areas than others, but there are some areas which still have a long way to go. What are you currently seeing, and what is your advice where tubers and weather conditions are very warm, so managing high respiration rates, high CO2, etc. And how does that advice change when the weather turns very cold, so to avoid condensation and so forth? Maybe, Simon, I could start by asking you to give your views on those situations.
Okay, so we've got quite a split across the country in terms of conditions, and I think it was mentioned last week that the west side of the country and further north is a lot wetter than the east. I suppose the benefit currently is the fact that the temperature is still fairly warm, which is helping to some extent, but it's certainly a lot wetter. Obviously, the issue now is at the wrong end of the season, and people are saying we've got to get potatoes out, whatever. So there's less time to think and wait for better conditions. A lot of crop is coming out wet, although it's still tuber temperatures around 12 degrees, which I've probed today, which is good. We seem to need to get them into store and dried very quickly. And that needs good ventilation, good stacking patterns in the store so that air can get through the boxes and back round again, collecting the moisture that will come off the potatoes, whether it be through respiration or evaporation. And until the potatoes are dry, you wouldn't really want to pull the temperatures down, because as the temperatures come down, it takes the curing period a lot longer, drying and curing period a lot longer. So you need to keep the temperatures up, but keep airflow going through the crop.
Great. Okay. And maybe, Mark, I could just ask you what you're seeing on your farm. Obviously, well, I think you finished your harvest some time ago, but you know, if you were lifting them under these conditions, what would you be doing? What have you got anything to add? What Simon's saying there about priorities?
I would fans flat out. We normally, even when we're filling, when it's warm and dry, we'd have the fridges on all the time. So when loading, the fans and the fridges are going. It's a dehumidifier. Also, the ones at the back of the store that you put in first is trying to dry those, because they'll normally be, when you filled the store, they'll be the warmest next to the fridge, because that's where the warmer air and the more moist air has been brought in. We've got curtains now in 4 stores, which are then curtains that let the chimneys of the overthrow sort of fridge store to sort of stop them short circuiting. We've even now put some other little side curtains down further down the stack in the main stack, so it just tries to force them coming through all the pallet ends, you know. And at the moment, flat out, count it as dehumidifier. If it's going at 12 degrees or 14 degrees, and you are then nearly getting filled, I start bringing the temperature down, because if you get the temperature coming down, the fridge is still in and the fridge is dehumidifying it. You know, but you know, it cures quite quickly, you know, at 12 or above. You know, it can be, you know, 7-10 days even if it's for curing. But if it's nasty wounds and you've had to lift up a bit and there's some shear damage, just drying them as quickly as possible and keeping the air. You know, if you can have it breezy, great. This is the best time to be spending your money on electricity at the moment. And if you've got some portable fans and you've not got some great areas, we will put them out on the corners of the cross stacking, even putting some on the top of the stacks where you think it's a little bit risky and there's a bit of shadowing. So if you see shadowing, then you've got to then keep moving that air around.
Right. Thank you.
Just Geoff, on that point on wound healing, I think if you look at the data on it, at 5 degrees, wound healing takes the initial process 7 to 14 days, and then the final bit takes up to 21 days, 21 to 42 days, something like that. Whereas if you're at the other end of the scale at 20 degrees centigrade, you're talking about 1 to 2 days, up to 3 to 6 for the final bit of. So you can see there's a huge difference at different temperatures.
Yeah. And what about high CO2 levels? Is that something you'd be worried about at this time? With high, you know, crops that are respiring rapidly.
Well, CO2 is naturally going to be produced by the crops coming in, because they're respiring, they're living organisms which are continuing to respire, and they will do in the store. I think once the store is loaded and the doors are shut, you want to be monitoring CO2 then, because obviously with the doors open, you're not getting a true reading, because obviously outside air is coming in. But once the store's full and shut, monitor the CO2 levels, particularly early on, because the levels will be higher. And then keep monitoring them. Generally speaking, unless you're introducing another gas, i.e. ethylene, you can let levels go up quite high, but you need to be careful from a health and safety point of view as well, letting them get too high.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, what about you, Mark? Have you got anything to add on that, on the CO2?
Well, we've got real-time monitoring on all the stores with CO2. With it's called a company called 30 megahertz that is a Dutch company and is mainly more on greenhouse and stuff like that. But I can get a real time on that. And the last store that we're pulling down now, and it's down to about 4.8 degrees for pre-pack. I have still got the port that we would put the old CO2 or the mint oil in. That's totally open, and that's a 6-inch pipe. And I've also got another 6-inch pipe that's got a time clock louver on it at the back of the fridge. So it's inside the fridge. So when the fans are blowing, it actually will use a venturi and bring in more air in from outside, but also we've got an exhaust down there as well. And at the moment I need both open to just keep it between 3 and just under 4,000 parts per million. I know that's only 0.3, 0.4% of CO2, but when they start to settle and they're just a little bit more not comatose, that's what I feel like after a long drawn out potato harvest. But as long as they're more settled, then I'll look at closing it up. But it's a bit strange. We want to get airtight to keep the temperature down and avoid the warm air coming in the spring and the summer. But at the moment, we've actually found out we needed a little leakier stores just to keep the CO2. I've had the instance of black carp before, and I don't want to repeat that mistake again. That cost me a lot of money.
Yeah. Right, thank you. And I mean, if it does turn very cold, I mean, hopefully everyone will get their crops up before that happens. But we all know it can change pretty quickly. What would you be on the lookout for if we suddenly get really cold, hard frost and so forth, and you're still trying to load potatoes into stores?
Well, obviously, as I mentioned before, the curing period is going to take an awful lot longer,
Right.
but you still need to get maximum ventilation through the store that you've got available. Now, some people do introduce heat, which you've got to be very careful of, just to bring the temperature up and thereby helping the curing process. But again, need to be careful on what you're doing on that. Just bring it up to about 8-10 degrees. And that should be sufficient to just help warm that air so it can pick up more moisture on the way around the crop.
Yeah, I guess you wouldn't want warm, humid air coming into contact with cold potatoes just being brought into the store, would you, from a condensation point of view?
Yes, but there's a fair bit of moisture on them at the time anyway. And then the other thing you need to be looking out for is the disease. I mean, obviously, when it's cold, you're likely to have more rots coming in at this time of year. So drying the crop really quickly is important, followed by monitoring throughout.
Yeah.
It does take a lot, and we've had to do it once before. It takes a long time to get the temperature up if you've got them in at 6 or 7 degrees or under that. I remember 2012. We got the last lot in and we were probing it, and the work from BPC was showing that if the tuber temperature is over 4 degrees, your bruising is susceptible. Over six is slightly susceptible, and over 8 there's probably no difference. But under 4, it suddenly jumps up considerably. But to then introduce the heat, we had to be very careful because you've got cold tubers. You're then trying to actually go round and round with a lot of air to try and dry them, and every time you're trying to dry and take the free moisture off, there's energy needed actually to get those that water to evaporate, so you're actually cooling it. So it was quite careful on how we brought it in, and we actually used electric heat mainly to do it, and it was slow. But remember, the fans will actually warm up the air slowly, but you've got 700-800 tons of 4.5-5 degrees. It's not fun.
Another point you can look at is how much you fill a store at this time of year. If you've got surplus space, then there's quite often it would be good just not to fill the stores right to the top. Leave the headlands ones out, which will allow better airflow around the store. The headland rows are always the hardest to dry and cool.
Well, thanks for that. I've got a couple of questions, and we've got a couple of more topics to move on to. So one question refers to maleic hydrazide, so I'll come on to that in a second when we talk about that. But the other question is, what tips do you have for improving or maximising store insulation? Mark,
okay. Yeah. I was fortunate, if that's the right case, to be in the study in, I think it was 2011, 2012, with the BPC about energy usage, and we then had a meter installed, and then we were actually plotting what tonnage we had in storage each month and what usage we used, and that highlighted that the more we could improve insulation, the better we did. So we actually then learnt from that study, when there's about 10 or 12 different stores, and we weren't anywhere near the best, but I then started to learn the techniques about when to turn the time clocks on, but also it gave me the impetus to increase our storage. So we got another store that got refoamed another 50 mil on top. And we luckily did that in about 2019, just before electricity costs became exorbitant. And that has now dropped our consumption there for a more ambient store at 8 degrees, I think by about 25 to 30%, just because it's actually preventing cold air getting in on that side of it. And a new store we just put up, we're now going to an insulation of 120 on the roof and 100 on the sides. At one point, when we all thought it was cheap, a bit like fertilizer and diesel at one point, with the generation of renewables we got, I thought I didn't need to worry too much. I'm glad I kept pursuing it. And the other thing I did learn when we put one store up, which we put 100 mil on the roof and 80 on the sides, composite panel, they do leak. So we actually got Adrian to come in and actually with an infrared camera, look at where the weak spots were, and then had a foaming company come in and do all of the gable ends, all the way along from the roof section meeting the side section and around the doors. And then not long after that, we then found that we'd sealed it too tightly. We have a venting system now to keep the CO2. But when you start to become a little bit emptier store, the CO2 levels are a lot less. And then you can store, we have stored till July, and you can keep the energy consumption down. It's amazing, even in the new store we put up with grain in it at the moment, is how much cooler it is with the insulation when we were filling it. I think we've got to assume that any chance to improve insulation, do it, but also monitor your CO2 at the same point.
Yeah, yeah. Right, thank you, Mark. Have you got anything? That's a very full answer there. I hope the person asking the questions got everything they need there. Simon, did you have anything to add to that on insulation?
The point Mark made about the thermal imaging camera is quite, and I think you want to be looking at that sort of thing in the summer months when your stores are empty.
Yeah.
So you go around and you'll know through the season where your weak points are in the store, where your warmer temperatures are in the tubers and that sort of thing. So make a log of those and then look to see if you can do some remedial action in the summer.
Yeah, brilliant. Right.
Measure it is one thing. So we got now meters in all the stores, and I'm then doing every couple of days is seeing how many kilowatts per day we're using and comparing it to the amount of fridge hours. And at the moment, I do not want to know how much our bill is for this month of October, but most stores have been going 24/7 at the moment, with fridge cutting in and out. But just measure it, know what you've got, and then you can make some changes. We've done inverter drives on electricity consumption, but this is a little bit later discussion, I guess, the energy side.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we'll come back to that. But just on that subject of knowing what's happening, could I just ask, if we start with you, Mark, what is your approach to sampling for MH, dry matter content, fry color, and general quality control assessments as you go along? What have you found?
Okay. Well, MH is mainly relying on, we're mainly pre-packed potatoes. We cold store about 5,000 and a bit tons of cold store potatoes for pre-pack. MH is normally when some packer then does the residues, and then we get a figure come back. I think we've discussed privately that we should probably look at doing this more proactively, and I think UPL might be looking at doing something that's going forward, because I think that's a really important way. Then we've got an idea of how much an MH in milligrams per gram or whatever it is that will make a difference to the sprouting, or when to sprout, suppressants needed or not. We also, though, do every 20 to 25 boxes, we will take 100 tubers out, wash them, size them, photograph them, defects out there, and put it on Excel. So, we're looking at probably 200 and 230 samples, and we employ someone that's probably cost me £1 a ton to do it. But I have then the power of hotboxing. Every 2 samples, we have a hot box for 2 samples of 25 tubers. So every tuber is 4%. And then every 3rd sample will be 100 tubers put in a brown bag and left there for 3 days to let natural bruising come through. and then we'll wash that, peel every 100 tubers, size it, grade it, defect level as well, know what the pests like, greening, and then give a very much a customer info about how good the quality is, what the baker percentage is, what the oversize is. And for me, knowing what you put in and then reassessing them in, say, 2 or 3 months' time is so important. Information is key. Also means you can probably know how much to push the price. And if you've got a bit of one with a bit of a weakness that may have a bit more greening or 5% of wireworm in at a 2 peel level, at least explain to them. And if they can still use it, well, you're in a better position than finding out later when there's better quality out there. So information is key again. And I did this, and I used to think it was a cost too much, but now it's so important that I've got a confidence of I'm not going to be underselling stuff, but also not assuming that it's brilliant when in actual fact it's bruised. It's got a few nicks and knocks here, and by the way, there's 4% slug.
Yeah. So, and that's very frequent measurements as well. So you've got a lot of live information, I guess. So if something starts to go wrong, you're the first to know, not your customer, and you can maybe, working with your customer, turn a negative into a positive in some of these situations.
The customers now, a lot of them will have QC where they'll send the results to you with a photo. So when you send the load in, within 2 or 3 hours, you might actually get a sampling of it, so you can have a discussion with the buyer and let's see how it works out. It's a two-way dialogue. That's the key bit of it.
Yeah. And Simon, we had a question relating to maleic hydrazide. That the question is just how long will it be effective after lifting? So how long is the MH persisting in the tubers at an effective level? Which is
well, the MH stays in the tubers. I mean, you can pick it up on residue tests all the way through the storage season. It doesn't really change. I think it gets into the tubers quite quickly. It's probably in there with decent uptake when you apply it in the growing season within at least a week, if shorter. And in terms of sampling, you've obviously got 2 points of sampling, either in the field or in store. But it's important to get a representative sample on this, and you probably only need 12 to 15 tubers. It doesn't sound a lot, but if you go and take a lab 25 kilos of tube, they'll only subsample it, and it probably will be less represented than you've picked 12 or 15 tubers from either different boxes or different plants.
Yeah. I mean, the MH level, as you say, doesn't decline in the tubers with time, does it? But I suppose what does happen is a level of MH which will suppress sprouting when they're semi-dormant or whatever. The potatoes reach the point where they can overcome it, I guess.
Yeah, level of MH in the tuber. There was this figure of 12 parts per million, sort of quoted a few years ago. But I think from what people have said and information that's come out of Holland as well, is that when you get down to even 5 parts per million, it's quite effective. But,
you can still get 50 or 60% control of sprouting with 3 to 5 parts. I think our advice was initially giving all the ideal conditions for the perfect application of MH and the maximum translocation down to the tubers. But after that really dry year, we realised that was putting some people off putting it on because they couldn't tick all the boxes. So we've changed slightly to saying just, unless its conditions are really bad, get it on and get some in there. Yeah.
I think it's become a very important product, particularly for people long-term storing. I mean, for the pre-pack side, it's probably enabled people to go all the way through without anything, unless you're going right through to July. And in the processing side, it's probably saved a sprout suppression as well.
Yeah. Well, I can't believe how quickly the time goes on these calls. We're up to 24 minutes past on my clock. So maybe we can just move on to the third part, which was around energy costs, which are lower than they were at the peak, but they're still very high. We've touched on this, Mark, already with both of you. We've talked about insulation and so forth. But what changes and investments have you made or would you advise to improve air movement and efficiency and save energy? Which have been the most valuable ones? And I mean, I know a lot of them won't be able to be implemented now, but just as well to talk about it, and then when the stores are empty, that'll be the time to do it, I guess. But what are your thoughts on that? Mark, did you want to go first on that one?
Okay, curtains. If you can then actually get the air to concentrate where you want it to go through the pallet ends, and then actually getting that even. So we've done a couple of stores now. We've turned the fridge pointing away just to try and get an even speed through the pallet ends. But you've got to test it and check it
to face the wall. Yeah,
which is a bit bizarre, but it's still, I now trust that as being my longest term store, and it's a lot better for weight loss.
Right.
You know, that the speed of air crossing over the top of the tubers has meant that we've got a more even keel now on that. The other thing is the thermal imaging. We've had grants in the past for inverters on the main fans, the compressor, the condensers, and also electronic expansion valves. You know, and I'm not a fridge expert, but if you've got someone saying, how can I make it better or improve it? Those are things to look at. Even buying the fans you have in the roof, just go and look at the spec of them, because some of them there, you know, running for quite a long time during the season could actually cost more in electricity cost than the fan is worth. So you've got to just look at actually what the energy consumption of those are. But I would look at those and monitor it. You know, just remember, on any inverter you've got, on any electric fan you've got, it's R cubed. So if you can say from 100%, you can reduce it to 80%, that's 0.8 times 0.8 times 0.8, which is equivalent to 50% reduction in your energy consumption if you can drop it down by 20%. But if you do that on your evaporator fans, then your evaporator might be actually colder and the TD increase. So you've got to have a fridge engineer to know how to play it, because you don't want too high a TD, because then you'll have a higher chance of weight loss on there. But all of those things make a difference, and if you can get renewable energy, is great. But I must admit, I agree with the NFU energy. If you've got a chance of wind or something like that, the biggest consumption you have is in September, October, November, when you've got a lot of blowing. And then when it starts to settle down, then you can start doing off-peak and things like that.
I mean, are there any investments, expenditure that you've made where you've measured it and said that wasn't worthwhile, or have you had a benefit from all of them?
Yes, there's a few. One, I
No
was
names.
too early. I was too early in the doctor, and I think in a way, battery storage I think would work really well, but you have got to have control of it or be able to program it in a right way to then do it. And I had a way, and it looked very simple to do it, but in the end, you've got to have such integration into your system and how to control it with the battery and the renewables. And I did that quite a long time ago, and I was too early. I think it was the glint in the milkman's eye for a guinea pig. That's all I would say on there.
Right. And Simon, what would you focus on when it comes to energy savings and efficiencies?
We want to get to positive ventilation as close to as possible. Without building new stores, you've got to try to make use of what you've got. So, as Mark's alluded to, the overhead throw stores, you can put these curtains around the sides and over the top around the evaporator fans to ensure the air is coming back through the pallet ends to try and get as positive as, or close to being positive as possible. Insulation, things like that, inverters, all these sort of things are going to help to reduce your costs, or reduce your kilowatts anyway. Kilowatts per hour.
Yeah.
But can I just say,
yeah,
you need to know how to understand how to work it. Because if you haven't got an understanding of what you're trying to do, you can get in quite a muddle of it. And I know there's a lot of systems out there that can do it and look at it remotely and things, but I still want to make sure that I go into the stores, smell it, feel it, touch it, and just have a proper look over. You know, remotely isn't always going to tell you that that coil isn't iced up, or there's a door being left ajar, or a light left on, or you got a bit of condensation, or a roof started to leak, or something like that. And I still think you've got to be in there quite regularly. So I make sure that that's something that's not too easy to go and just look from your desk and think, oh, that's okay.
So AI and robots are not going to take over everything just yet, then, Mark?
Unless they can start doing smell, and I must admit, I don't know how much and what flavor blackleg is or anything like that, but somehow my nose can still pick that up if there is any.
Yeah. Well, that's unbelievable. We've reached the end already. I think we got through the key points of those three main subjects, but that's our 30 minutes up. So I just to finish, I'd just like to say, if you'd like more information and advice, you can subscribe to Simon's web newsletter. It's on his SDF Agriculture website. Mark, I don't think you have one yet, but I'm sure it's something you'll be working on. We will email you all in the next day or two. We'd very much appreciate your feedback on this session, the last one as well, if you were on that, and very importantly, what you would like us to cover in the final two webinars. We'll also, if you could also include in your reply any questions that you still have that you maybe think of after we've finished. We'll also include on that email a link to the recording of this session, the basis points reference codes, and an invite to the next webinar, which will be on the 5th of November at 5 p.m, where, amongst other things, we'll shine the spotlight on sprout suppression, which is a big subject in its own right. So thank you very much, Mark and Simon, for generously sharing your experience with us. Thank you all for taking the time to dial in. So just to say goodbye from Mark and Simon.
Thank you.
And it's goodbye from me, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Goodbye.
Brilliant. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.